The first crack of dawn brought with it not the gentle chirping of sparrows, but the sickening thud of the day's financial penalty hitting the welcome mat. Ethan Kyler didn't even need to open the envelope anymore. He knew the crisp ivory cardstock, the formal font, and the meticulously handwritten signature of Veronica Thorne, president of the Maplewood Homeowners Association Board. He knew the figure, too, a crushing $250. He was sitting at his breakfast bar, the blue glow of his architectural drafting tablet illuminating his face, when the sound echoed through his silent, impeccably modern home. The daily fine had become the morning alarm, a perverse Pavlovian signal for the start of his personal war. Ethan didn't move immediately. He finished sketching the cornice detail on the tablet, his hand movements precise, disciplined. He was a man who built things, skyscrapers, luxury homes, entire communities, from the ground up, following codes and blueprints with religious rigor. He understood rules. What he couldn't abide was the abuse of rules. And Veronica Thorne, in her tailored navy suits and her relentless pursuit of trivial compliance, was the absolute definition of abuse. He finally stood, his 6-foot frame uncoiling slowly. He walked to the door, opened it, and stooped to pick up the letter. The violation cited today was predictable. Unauthorized exterior paint color, per Section 314, subsection A, Appendix Beta. Ethan's home was painted dove gray, a color that had been on the HOA-approved palette for 10 years. Veronica, however, had decreed 2 weeks ago, solely via an unsigned email, that the approved batch of dove gray manufactured before 2022 was now subtly non-compliant because its undertone was perceptibly warmer than the current standard, creating an aesthetic discordance with the neighborhood's established cool palette. It was completely insane. It was also completely personal. 2 months ago, Ethan had voted against Veronica's proposed $50,000 budget increase to fund a neighborhood beautification consultant, Reed, her cousin's failing landscape company. He didn't just vote against it. He provided a 10-page, financially detailed counterproposal proving the consultant was unnecessary and the budget was inflated. He won the vote. He lost his peace. The fines had started the next day. A dead patch of grass, $100. Incorrectly angled solar panel reflection, $150. A rogue leaf on his driveway, $200. Failure to maintain cleanliness of common area adjacent to property line. Now, the daily paint fine. The total bill, including late fees and administrative costs, stood at $8,750. He didn't pay them. He logged them. Ethan walked to his home office. It was less an office and more a command center. Against one wall stood a series of perfectly labeled folders. He pulled the one marked VT Fines Dove Gray. Inside, he placed the new notice. Then he opened a separate, thick binder labeled Project Goliath. Project Goliath was not about fighting the fines. That was the petty battle Veronica expected. Project Goliath was about collapsing the entire structure that gave her the authority to levy them. He picked up his phone and called the only person he trusted with the blueprint. Marcus. Ethan's voice was flat, devoid of the simmering anger he felt. I just received today's installment of the Dove Gray ransom. Total is approaching $9 grand. Are the documents ready? Marcus Albright, Ethan's former college roommate and now a sharp corporate attorney specializing in liability and governance, sighed heavily on the other end. $9,000 over 2 months for a warm undertone? Ethan, that woman is clinically deranged. Yes, the documents are ready. I filed the initial request for the records audit with the state yesterday, and the formal notice of challenge to the board's operating structure is ready to be delivered. No, Ethan corrected him immediately. Do not deliver it, not yet. We need the trigger event, the final spectacular act of overreach. I need her to commit to the final step of her play. She's threatening to file a lien on your property, Ethan. That is overreach. That's a serious legal maneuver. She sent you the intent notice last week. If she files, you'll have to disclose it if you ever try to refinance or sell. Ethan leaned back in his leather chair, his eyes fixed on the grid of the binder's table of contents. A lien is a debt instrument, Marcus. And a debt instrument can only be placed on a property if the debt is proven valid and the board is operating under valid corporate statutes. That, my friend, is where she dug her own grave. Walk me through it one more time, Marcus requested, the sound of keyboard clicks audible as he pulled up their shared file. It's simple, convoluted, and beautiful, Ethan said, a rare, cold smile touching his lips. I hired the investigator Janice 6 weeks ago. She didn't look for personal dirt. She looked for paperwork. She found 3 things. 1, the Maplewood HOA's original certificate of incorporation expired in 2018 and was never properly renewed, making it a de facto non-entity under state corporate law. 2, the bylaws require a supermajority of 75% for any constitutional amendment. Yet the dues structure, which includes the entire fines section, was updated 5 years ago with a simple 51% majority. That structure is invalid, Marcus whistled, a low, impressed sound. So the fines aren't just subjective, they're legally null and void because the section authorizing them was never properly adopted. Exactly. But the grand finale, Marcus, the legal trap she didn't see coming, is the third piece. Janice found that Veronica's own election to the board presidency 3 years ago was invalid. Her winning margin was secured by counting 10 absentee ballots that were submitted electronically. The bylaws, written in 1995, specifically state all ballots must be delivered via registered U.S. mail or in-person notarized submission. She's been operating as president under a fundamentally void election. So, the entire board is compromised because the president is compromised, and the fines she's issuing are based on an illegal constitutional amendment. And the entire organization is technically a defunct corporation, Marcus summarized, his voice rising with professional excitement. You're not just fighting the fines. You're executing a hostile corporate takeover, nullifying every decision made for the last 3 years. I'm doing better than that. I'm forcing dissolution and restructuring. I'm taking away her pulpit and burning the sermon notes. But I need her to publicly, irrevocably commit to the lien. I need her to cross the line from harassment to demonstrable, recorded financial damages against my property based on those void statutes. That's the proof of recklessness I need for the final filing. And what's the trigger? The annual budget meeting is on Friday. I need her to ratify the lien request against me at that meeting. She loves public displays of power. She'll do it. Later that afternoon, the trigger event arrived, delivered not by mail, but by the sight of a gleaming black Lexus SUV parking diagonally across Ethan's driveway entrance. Veronica Thorne emerged, flanked by 2 other visibly uncomfortable board members, a meek, silver-haired man named Mr. Henderson, who always looked like he was about to apologize for existing, and Mrs. Lynn, who kept her eyes fixed on the immaculate shrubbery. Veronica, impeccably dressed in a crimson power suit that seemed to vibrate with self-importance, marched up Ethan's walkway. She carried a clipboard like a weapon. Ethan met her at the door, leaning against the frame, his hands tucked casually into the pockets of his tailored slacks. His posture radiated stillness, a challenge Veronica never seemed to register. "Good afternoon, Ms. Thorne. And gentlemen, Mrs. Lynn," Ethan greeted, his voice polite, clinical. "I trust you're here to discuss the utterly subjective nature of warm undertones on my $250 a day paint job?" Veronica's mouth, a thin, perfect line of red lipstick, tightened. She rarely appreciated humor directed at her authority. "Mr. Kyler, this is an official board visit. It's to observe the state of continued non-compliance and document the evidence for the forthcoming legal action. I suggest you step aside. Be my guest," Ethan said, gesturing expansively at his lawn. "Please observe. Note the precise shade of the dove gray. Feel free to bring a spectrometer, although you'll find it matches the 2012-2021 approved shade perfectly. We're here for a more significant matter now." "Mr. Kyler," Veronica stated, tapping the clipboard with a manicured nail, "the board has received multiple anonymous complaints about the size and density of your backyard redwood tree. It appears to be non-compliant with the tree canopy ordinance enacted in 2019. Ethan blinked, not in surprise, but in silent admiration of her boundless creativity for malice. "The redwood tree, the one planted 14 years ago, approved by the previous board, which is the only thing providing shade to 3 properties on this block. The ordinance dictates that any tree exceeding 30 feet in height must be pruned to maintain the natural light access of neighboring properties. Yours is estimated at 35 feet and growing rapidly. This is a severe structural violation. Effective immediately, you are fined $500 a day until the tree is trimmed to code or completely removed. Mr. Henderson actually flinched, his eyes darting to Ethan with genuine distress. Mrs. Lynn still stared at the bushes. $500, Ethan repeated, letting the number hang in the pristine afternoon air. For a tree. A living, healthy native redwood. Compliance is mandatory, Mr. Kyler. Furthermore, we find the cumulative debt of your fines, now including the lien processing fee, to be an intolerable burden on the association's accounts receivable. The squeal of tires was deafeningly out of place in the quiet, manicured perfection of Maplewood Estates. Veronica Thorne didn't stop to wave goodbye to the retreating figures of Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Lynn. She didn't even put her Lexus into reverse properly. She slammed it into drive, peeling rubber as she corrected the diagonal park and sped down Ethan Kyler's street. The fear was cold, sharp, and entirely alien to her. It wasn't the fear of losing the house. She didn't care about the house. It was the fear of losing control. Petition for corporate dissolution. The phrase echoed in her mind, a legal death knell. She had been so consumed by the pleasure of her escalating harassment, the daily fine, the increasing debt, the threat of public foreclosure, that she had completely missed the counteroffensive. Ethan hadn't been defending. He had been gathering. She pulled into the driveway of her own sprawling, aggressively tasteful Mediterranean villa and killed the engine. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't immediately unlock the passenger door to retrieve her clipboard. Inside, she bypassed the kitchen and went straight to her mahogany-paneled home office. She didn't call the other board members. They were weak. She called the HOA's actual hired legal counsel, a firm named Sterling & Associates, known for its exorbitant fees and minimal oversight. A receptionist answered on the third ring. Sterling & Associates. This is Veronica Thorne, president of Maplewood HOA. Put me through to Mr. Sterling immediately. This is an emergency corporate liability issue. She was forced to wait 5 excruciating minutes, during which her adrenaline cooled into a venomous, focused rage. When Mr. Sterling, a man whose voice sounded permanently exhausted, finally picked up, Veronica didn't offer a greeting. Did you know our certificate of incorporation expired 7 years ago, Sterling? Did you know our bylaws regarding electronic voting are invalidating every decision we've made for 3 years? Sterling cleared his throat, a dry, papery sound. Ms. Thorne, we advised the previous board management firm that the renewal was pending state confirmation in 2019. It's a common administrative backlog. Regarding the bylaws, they are a relic, yes. But until successfully challenged, we operate under the assumption of implied consent. Implied consent won't matter when a disgruntled homeowner files a petition for corporate dissolution. Veronica spat, the words tasting like ash. Ethan Kyler is preparing to file this Saturday. He has evidence that my entire election was void. Is that true? There was a pregnant silence on the line. The electronic absentee ballots? Yes, that was a point of discussion during your transition. It was advised we amend the bylaws immediately, but the paperwork was postponed. Postponed? You mean I've been operating as president of a legally defunct organization, making financially binding decisions based on void rules, and threatening a lien against a homeowner's primary residence? Her voice was dangerously low. Ms. Thorne, we can file the renewal papers tonight, backdating the corporate status. We can commission an emergency bylaw restatement this week. It will be expensive, but we can contain this if you instruct Mr. Kyler to cease legal action immediately. I will not instruct him to cease action. I will crush him, Veronica hissed. He gave me 3 days. I have until Friday's meeting. If I retract the lien now, he wins. If I apologize, I lose everything, my power, my position, and the ability to control this community. I need a countermeasure, something that proves the HOA is still in control. Any action that could be construed as further punitive harassment, especially now that he has served notice of litigation, would be unwise, Ms. Thorne. It could strengthen his case for malicious intent and corporate recklessness. Veronica ignored the lawyer's cautious warning. She terminated the call abruptly, tossing her phone onto the large executive desk. Unwise, weak. Ethan Kyler had underestimated her capacity for chaos. He was a creature of rules and logic. He planned his demolition for Saturday. But the rules of war change when you're fighting a cornered animal. Veronica decided the only way to stop Project Goliath was to detonate the battlefield before the clock ran out. The first countermeasure arrived 45 minutes later. Ethan, back in his office, was reviewing the ultra-virus statutes with Marcus via video conference, calmly discussing the proper sequence of the filings. He's not going to expect the lien to be the thing that brings him down, Ethan was saying, tracing the line of a statute on his screen. The state Supreme Court precedents are clear. Once a governing body acts outside its chartered purpose to inflict personal financial damage on a member, especially when the body's corporate status is lapsed, the floodgates open for punitive damages. Just then, a loud diesel-fueled roaring began outside. Ethan glanced out the window. A massive industrial-grade wood chipper, the size of a small truck, was backing up his street. Behind it, a pickup truck belonging to the HOA's contracted tree service, Green Glory Landscaping, parked directly across the entrance to his property. A man in a fluorescent yellow vest hopped out and began setting up orange construction cones, completely blocking vehicle access to Ethan's driveway and mailbox. "Hold on, Marcus," Ethan muttered, grabbing his blazer. The board just made its move. He met the crew foreman, a burly, sweaty man named Sal, at the end of his driveway. "What is this, Sal?" "You're blocking my street access." Sal avoided eye contact, fiddling with his safety glasses. "Orders from Miss Thorne, Mr. Kyler. Emergency common area maintenance. The Maplewood Canopy Ordinance is in effect. We got to secure the area before we start the trim job." "Trim job? On what?" Sal pointed a thick finger past Ethan, toward the imposing, majestic redwood. "That bad boy. 35 feet, she says. Code says 30. We got to take 5 feet off the top and thin out the canopy to comply with neighbor light ordinances. We're starting tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Mandatory safety closure." Ethan felt a genuine jolt of cold anger, not for the fine, but for the violation of the tree itself. It wasn't just landscaping. It was a cornerstone of his property, a link to the natural world he valued. This wasn't a warning. This was an irreversible act of architectural violence. "You won't be starting anything at 8 a.m., Sal," Ethan said, his voice quiet but carrying the authority of an ultimatum. "That tree is subject to a private property dispute, and any action against it would constitute destruction of private property under litigation threat. You touch that tree, I will personally guarantee your company is named as a defendant in a multi-million-dollar suit for punitive damages. Get your gear off my street and do not set foot on my property." Sal backed up, clearly intimidated by Ethan's controlled, cold fury. "Look, man, I just follow the work order." "I got a contract. It says emergency maintenance, effective immediately. The HOA is a defunct corporation operating under void rules. Any contract signed by its president is, as of Friday, highly contestable. You're talking about risking your entire business on the whim of a desperate woman. Think carefully about that before you put a single foot on a ladder." Sal looked at the redwood, then at the man who spoke like a judge delivering a verdict, and finally at the expensive equipment in his driveway. He nodded slowly. "Right, I'm just blocking access tonight. We'll wait for a formal legal notice before we start cutting." Ethan watched them secure the street closure, a spiteful, petty maneuver that still left his car trapped, and walked back inside. The phone was ringing. It was Marcus. Ethan, the HOA's management firm, just sent out an urgent all-caps email. They've suspended the annual landscaping water allotment to every property pending an emergency conservation audit. That means they just cut the feed to your irrigation system. Targeting your redwood, didn't they? Ethan looked through his kitchen window at the redwood. The tree was old, established, but the summer heat was brutal. Depriving it of water, especially after an aggressive public threat, was pure malice. "They didn't just cut the water, Marcus. They blocked my street with a wood chipper. They're escalating the war from paper to physical damage. They want me to panic and pay the fine to save the tree." "This is gold, Ethan," Marcus said, sounding grimly excited. This confirms the malicious intent and reckless disregard for member well-being. This is precisely the kind of evidence the judge will look at when considering the receiver appointment. Do we need to move the filing date? Ethan paused, staring at the tree. To move the filing date meant tipping his entire hand before the Friday meeting, giving Veronica a chance to file her backdated corporate renewal and muddy the waters. The original plan was clean. Let her ratify the lien, use the minutes as final proof, then file for dissolution. No. We stick to the Saturday filing, Ethan decided firmly. Let the tree go without water for 36 hours. It can survive that. I want her to believe her tactic is working. I want her to feel victorious when she walks into that meeting tomorrow morning. Thursday night fell, and the tension in Maplewood was palpable. Neighbors who had quietly supported Ethan, the ones who also hated the arbitrary fines and Veronica's iron fist, sent nervous, coded texts. "Are you okay? Is the tree safe?" Ethan responded with a calm, one-word reply. Prepping. He used the time to personally check his legal documents, triple-checking the election bylaws, the non-renewal certificate, and the chain of evidence. He sat in the dark, the faint blue glow of his drafting tablet illuminating the meticulously org. The digital clock on Ethan's microwave read 1:47 a.m. The light was on in his home office, bathing the meticulous stacks of legal binders in a harsh, cold, fluorescent glow. On his screen, a video conference with Marcus Albright was in progress, the lawyer looking rumpled and thoroughly awake, his face pale in the light of his own screen. "I've managed to get an emergency order stamped by a duty judge," Marcus reported, rubbing his temples. "It's not a full injunction, it's a temporary restraining order, TRO, regarding the tree. It cites irreparable harm to private property pending the corporate status hearing. Crucially, it prohibits the HOA, its agents, or contractors from commencing work before 11:59 a.m. today. I've emailed the PDF to the CEO of Green Glory Landscaping, and I'm overnighting a hard copy via courthouse courier to the management firm. But, Ethan, you know how these contractors work. They get paid by the job. They'll show up at 8, and they'll claim they never saw the email." "They will claim that," Ethan confirmed, looking out his window at the dark, looming silhouette of the redwood, which felt suddenly vulnerable, exposed. "Which is why we need more than a piece of paper. The paper will protect us from liability, but not from the chainsaw." "You're thinking of a physical block?" Marcus asked, his tone wary. "I'm thinking of a legal physical block," Ethan corrected, the precision returning to his voice. "I need a temporary, non-aggressive barrier. Something that forces the crew to physically breach a legal boundary to begin work. If they breach the boundary while ignoring the TRO, they've committed aggravated trespass and property damage. We can hit them with the full liability hammer." Ethan grabbed a flashlight and strode out onto his lawn. He shone the beam toward the street where the wood chipper and the landscaping truck remained, silently and menacingly parked. He then directed the light toward the front of his own house. "I'm looking at the HOA bylaws, Article 6, Section C, Construction and Repair Work. It states that for any external construction or repair requiring heavy machinery to operate within 10 feet of the property line, the owner must install a temporary, professionally erected safety barrier visible to the street, 36 hours prior to commencement. But the HOA ordered the work." "Ethan," Marcus pointed out, "the bylaws don't specify who has to put up the barrier, only that the work cannot commence without it. The HOA failed to install it. I am the owner, and I am enforcing the bylaws they are using against me. If the crew comes to cut, they will find their work site non-compliant with their own safety rules. I'm legally preventing them from performing the task." Marcus let out a short, sharp laugh. "Brilliant. You're using their bureaucracy as a shield. Do you have fencing materials at 2 a.m.? I'm an architect, Marcus. I build things for a living. I always have materials. I'm going to use the temporary chain-link fencing I used for the foundation drainage repair last year. It's 6 feet high and fully visible. I'll hang a large printed copy of the TRO right on the gate. It creates an undeniable, visible legal barrier. Do it. And Ethan, you have to be at that meeting at 9 sharp. You need to let her ratify the lien. That is the final nail in the HOA's coffin. Do not miss that vote." "I won't. She can have her 15 minutes of power, but she won't get my tree. I'll see you in court, Marcus." Ethan hung up and went to work. By 4 a.m., the front of his property was enclosed by a neat, 6-foot-tall chain-link fence, the temporary structure standing starkly against the meticulously manicured lawn. On the locked gate, illuminated by a strategically positioned solar lamp, was a large, laminated copy of the temporary restraining order. At 7:55 a.m., Veronica Thorne was already seated in the Maplewood Community Center boardroom, radiating controlled aggression. She wore a severe black suit, and her hair was pulled back so tightly it looked painful. She needed the tree to be gone. The sight of the decimated redwood would be the visible victory that negated Ethan's terrifying legal threat. It would prove that the HOA and she still held absolute power. She looked at her watch. 5 minutes until they start cutting. Board members Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Lynn shuffled in, looking small and miserable. The room quickly filled with about 20 of the 50-something homeowners, most drawn by the dramatic email announcement regarding the Kyler property foreclosure. They sat in folding chairs, tense and expectant. Just as Veronica was about to call the meeting to order, her phone vibrated with a text from Sal, the landscaping foreman. It was a single curt message. Work stopped. Legal order. Owner put up a fence. Veronica's composure fractured. She snatched up her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she dialed Sal's number. "What do you mean, work stopped?" she hissed, keeping her voice low but piercing. "The guy got a court order, Ms. Thorne." Sal's voice was defensive. "A TRO? Says we can't touch the property until tomorrow?" And he put up a fence. "A proper, chained and locked fence. I'm not getting green glory tied up in a judge's contempt order for a $1,000 trim job. We're pulling out!" Veronica felt a spike of blinding heat rush to her cheeks. Kyler had fought back, not with money, but with law. He had preempted her preemption. She looked at her watch. 8:05 a.m. The meeting was about to start, and she was already losing the first battle. "You wait there, Sal. If you leave, you're in breach of contract," she snapped before hanging up. She slammed the phone down and took a deep, shaky breath. She had to pivot. She couldn't show weakness. She would proceed with the lien ratification, the public humiliation. She would use this morning's interference as proof of Kyler's defiance. "Good morning, everyone," Veronica announced, her voice pitched high with false, brittle authority. "Welcome to the annual budget meeting. Before we proceed with the budget, we have a matter of immediate and pressing concern. The blatant, repeated and highly aggressive non-compliance of Mr. Ethan Kyler. Property 412. She skipped the first 3 agenda items. We are moving directly to item 4, ratification of delinquency, lien, and foreclosure. Action against property 412. She launched into a prepared monologue, detailing the long list of fines, the paint, the dead grass, the rogue leaf, escalating to the present $9,450 debt and the recent, egregious defiance of the emergency tree ordinance. She finished by displaying a printed copy of the proposed lien on the overhead projector. Mr. Kyler's actions today, obstructing legal common area work with unauthorized structures and filing frivolous legal challenges, demonstrate his utter contempt for our governing structure. The board must approve this lien ratification immediately to protect the financial solvency of the association and demonstrate that our rules have force. She glanced triumphantly at the entrance. Ethan Kyler was conspicuously absent. The victory was hers even if the tree was still standing. He was hiding. He was defeated. Mr. Henderson, pale and sweating, finally spoke up, his voice barely a squeak. "Madam President, given the recent notice of intent to challenge the board, should we perhaps consult with Mr. Sterling before we ratify a foreclosure action?" "Mr. Sterling has been consulted," Veronica lied smoothly. "He advises immediate action to secure the association's financial interests. All in favor of ratifying the lien against property 412? Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Lynn exchanged a look of pure misery, but they raised their hands. The 20 homeowners remained silent, their eyes fixed on the projection, but no one dared to vote against the president. "The motion carries," Veronica declared, slamming the gavel down. "The lien is ratified. Mr. Kyler has exhausted his options. We will now proceed with item 5. The door to the boardroom swung open with a smooth, silent sweep that stopped Veronica mid-sentence. Ethan Kyler stood in the doorway. He was wearing the same tailored suit he'd worn the day before, immaculate and calm. He wasn't breathing hard, despite his morning's activities. He held a leather portfolio in one hand and a small, official-looking device in the other, a digital recorder, clearly visible to everyone in the room. He walked past the back rows, his gaze locked only on Veronica. Every head in the room swiveled to follow him. The silence was absolute. "Forgive my tardiness, Madam President," Ethan said, his voice carrying easily through the room, its tone mild, almost courteous. "I was detained by Green Glory Landscaping, who were attempting to unlawfully trespass and destroy private property under void contracts. I believe that unfortunate incident provides an excellent segue to the next topic of discussion." He reached the front of the room and placed his portfolio on the table. He did not sit down. Veronica, her face flushed crimson, gripped the gavel so tightly her knuckles were white. "Mr. Kyler, you are out of order. We have just ratified the lien action against your property. If you have any public comments, they will be restricted to 3 minutes during the open forum at the conclusion of the budget review." Ethan smiled, a slow, utterly devastating expression that didn't reach his eyes. "On the contrary, Madam President, I believe I am perfectly in order. You just ratified a lien based on a debt structure that was illegally adopted, enforced by a board that has operated outside the scope of its expired corporate charter, and is presided over by an individual whose election was fundamentally void. You just committed the final necessary act of ultra-virus recklessness I required for my filing." He pulled a stack of heavily stamped documents from his portfolio. The top document was the same one Veronica had glimpsed on his porch. The silence Ethan left behind in the Maplewood Community Center boardroom was violently shattered by the sound of the gavel clattering to the floor. Veronica Thorne lunged forward, scrambling to snatch up the bylaw section Ethan had slid toward her. Her eyes, wide and manic, tracked the underlined words. "Registered U.S. mail or in-person notarized submission." Henderson. "Lynn, this is a fabrication!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with fury and disbelief. "He forged this. He is attempting a hostile takeover, an insurrection." Mr. Henderson, who had spent the last 3 years shrinking under Veronica's tyrannical thumb, finally found his spine, albeit a trembling one. "Madam President, the document. That's the original 1995 section. We were told the electronic voting was an amendment, not just an interpretation. It was an amendment." Veronica lied, stumbling over the lie she had internalized as truth. But the homeowners, their initial shock giving way to righteous outrage, were already on their feet. "So all those fines we paid were invalid?" shouted Mrs. Rodriguez from the third row, her face contorted with 8 years of pent-up resentment. "My $3,000 architectural review fee? Is that gone? The board must convene immediately in executive session," Veronica declared, attempting to regain control. "Everyone out! This meeting is dissolved." But the authority had drained out of her voice, leaving only desperation. Homeowners swarmed the table, demanding answers, demanding their money back, shouting about the void liens and the defunct corporation. Outside the community center, Ethan found Marcus Albright waiting by his car, a grin splitting his face. "Perfect. Ethan, absolutely perfect execution," Marcus said, slapping his portfolio. The drama was exquisite. The judge just signed the order for the immediate appointment of the temporary receiver, citing the imminent threat of property destruction and the clear evidence of corporate negligence. The management firm's email system has already been shut down. "Who is the receiver?" Ethan asked, his gaze fixed on the entrance, waiting for the inevitable exit. "A gentleman named Arthur Vance, a retired CPA with a sterling reputation for corporate cleanups. He's already en route to the Maplewood management office to secure the assets. That includes the bank accounts, the service contracts, and most importantly, the official HOA records." Ethan felt a sudden, sharp coldness prickle his skin. He looked at the chaos inside the center. "The records? Marcus, where are the paper ballots from 3 years ago? The ones that prove her election was void? They should be stored in the management firm's archive room, on site at the community center complex." "Why?" "Because Veronica Thorne is a narcissist," Ethan said, his voice flat. "She doesn't care about the fines or the receiver. She cares about truth. and the physical paper ballots are the only non-digital evidence that she was never the president. If Vance gets those, she's facing criminal charges for misrepresentation and fraud under the corporate dissolution statutes. She will go for those records. Right now! As if on cue, the automatic glass doors of the community center burst open. Veronica emerged, not toward her car, but running full tilt toward the small one-story building adjacent to the center, the Maplewood Estates Management Office. Her blazer was half unbuttoned, her hair was coming loose, and her face was a mask of terrified, focused intent. "Marcus, she's making a run for the records room. That's where the physical ballots are. We have to stop her!" Marcus exclaimed, scrambling for his car keys. "No, we observe," Ethan said, already striding across the plaza, moving fast but not running. Running implied panic. Ethan's pace was measured, purposeful. She is about to commit a felony in front of a dozen witnesses and the newly appointed receiver. We just need to ensure the receiver gets there first. They reached the management office just as Veronica was hysterically trying to pull open the heavy, reinforced door. It was locked. "Open this door! Open the door, you incompetent slugs!" She screamed at the vacant reception area inside, visible through the glass. Marcus stepped forward, speaking into his cell phone. "Mr. Vance, I need you to divert directly to the main management office entrance. The former president is currently attempting to gain unauthorized access to the records and may attempt to destroy evidence." "Step away from the door, Ms. Thorne," Ethan ordered, his voice echoing in the quiet office complex plaza. Veronica spun around, her eyes blazing with raw, unbridled hatred. She saw Ethan calm, composed, and victorious, and her fear instantly converted to pure, violent rage. "You," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at him. "You planned this! You lied about the paint! You let those lazy idiots pay their way out of compliance just to destroy me!" "I didn't destroy you, Veronica. You did that when you cheated on an election and leveraged an expired corporate charter to enrich yourself and harass your neighbors," Ethan countered. Standing just outside her striking distance, Veronica's gaze darted around desperately. She noticed the small metal lockbox fixed to the wall next to the door, the key drop for the maintenance team. In a desperate, animalistic move, she ripped a small, heavy decorative stone from the edge of the planter box and slammed it against the flimsy lockbox. The thin metal bent, and with a grunt of effort, she managed to pry the maintenance key out. "The key to the archive room is in here," she yelled, holding the key like a trophy. She jammed the maintenance key into the main lock. It was the wrong key for the deadbolt, but it fit the lower knob. She wrenched it open and stormed inside the vacant office. Ethan didn't follow. He knew the archive room was deeper inside. He turned to Marcus. "Call the sheriff. Aggravated trespass and attempted destruction of evidence. Tell them the former HOA president is actively breaking and entering." Before Marcus could finish dialing, a nondescript black sedan pulled up to the curb. A man in an immaculate gray suit and wire-rimmed glasses, carrying a briefcase, stepped out. "This was Arthur Vance, the receiver. Mr. Albright? Mr. Kyler? I assume the woman currently attempting to break down an interior door is the former president?" Vance asked dryly, looking toward the noise emanating from the office interior. "That is Veronica Thorne, attempting to destroy the election ballots that voided her presidency," Ethan confirmed. "Understood. I have the court order granting immediate possession of all HOA assets and records," Vance stated, calm and efficient. He pulled a heavy ring of master keys from his suit pocket. The HOA management had been legally obliged to turn them over to the court's agent. Vance bypassed the front office. Walking directly to the interior hallway, Ethan and Marcus trailing him. They found Veronica in the archive room, a small windowless space lined with filing cabinets. She was in a frenzy, pulling out drawers, tossing folders over her shoulder, her perfectly controlled facade completely gone. She was hyperventilating, her mascara smudged by sweat and tears. She finally found a heavy plastic bin marked 2021 election ballots. She ripped the lid off. The bin was filled with crisp, 3-year-old paper ballots. She grabbed a handful, her eyes wild, and pulled a lighter from her pocket, a sleek, gold object she used to light expensive cigars after celebratory board dinners. "You won't have the proof," she screamed, flicking the lighter open. Vance, the receiver, moved with surprising speed. He didn't physically engage. He simply stepped between Veronica and the open bin of ballots. holding up his court order like a shield. "Mrs. Thorne, you are under immediate notice of the State Circuit Court. This building, its contents, and all records within are under receivership. Any attempt to destroy these records constitutes contempt of court, obstruction of justice, and felony destruction of evidence. I advise you to drop the lighter and step away from the documents." Veronica froze, the lighter burning brightly in her shaking hand, the flame inches from the dry paper ballots. She stared not at Vance, but at Ethan, who stood calmly in the doorway, watching her final, desperate, pathetic act. The realization hit her. She was trapped in a room with the evidence of her ruin, and the only path to the door was blocked by the law itself. With a guttural cry of frustration, she didn't drop the lighter, she hurled it. It flew past Vance's ear and struck the far wall, harmlessly clattering to the carpet. Then she let out a piercing, animalistic scream, kicked the heavy filing cabinet, and stormed past the receiver and Marcus, colliding violently with Ethan in the doorway. She didn't stop. She ran out of the office, across the plaza, and back into the community center parking lot. Ethan watched her go, rubbing his shoulder where she had struck him. The evidence was safe. The trap had closed. "Mr. Vance, I believe the sheriff is on their way," Marcus said, pulling his phone from his ear. Vance, completely unruffled, bent down and picked up the gold lighter. "Thank you, counselor. I'll secure these records and begin the inventory. This association is effectively dissolved." Ethan nodded, a sense of weary finality washing over him. The war was won. As they turned to leave, the silence in the plaza was broken by a new grating sound, a screeching, tearing metallic sound coming from the main power junction box. Located behind the community center, they exchanged a look of alarm and ran around the building. Veronica Thorne was standing next to the main electrical box for the entire Maplewood Estates community, which housed the meters for the common areas, the security gates, and the irrigation system. She held a heavy, rusty pair of pruning shears, the largest she could find. With a final, the smell of burnt insulation and ozone was thick and acrid, mixing sickeningly with the cloying sweetness of the summer morning. The silence that followed the electrical crack was profound, broken only by the distant, growing wail of approaching sirens. Ethan stood motionless, staring at the smoking, fractured junction box. The entire community was dark. 150 homes suddenly vulnerable, their gates locked open, their lawns starting the clock on terminal dehydration. Veronica Thorne, standing a few feet away, looked like a revenant, wild-eyed, covered in soot, and radiating a deranged satisfaction. "You won the game of paper." "Kyler!" she sneered, her voice hoarse from screaming, but laced with a final desperate venom. "But I won the game of reality. No power, no water. Try finding me now. Try telling me what I can and can't do when the whole place is a dumpster fire." Marcus Albright, the lawyer, recovered first. He had his phone back to his ear, his voice tight. "Sheriff, she has physically vandalized the main electrical supply. We need an immediate squad car and an ambulance. She is a danger to herself and the public." 2 police cars, their sirens now muted, slid to a stop near the community center entrance. 2 uniformed deputies, followed by a plainclothes detective, exited the vehicles, their hands resting cautiously near their weapons. The sight of the smoking box and Veronica's hysterical figure confirmed the severity of the call. "Ma'am, step away from the electrical panel," the detective ordered, his voice authoritative but calm. Veronica didn't move. She seemed utterly detached from the scene, looking only at Ethan. "Did you know, Kyler? When I was elected, I had to sign a personal indemnity clause. It protected me from lawsuits, but only if the board acted within the bounds of the valid corporate charter. You saw that, didn't you? That's why you waited." Ethan finally moved, stepping around the smoking ruin of the junction box, ignoring the police who were now flanking Veronica. He looked her directly in the eyes. "The indemnity clause protects you from the HOA's liability. It does not protect you from criminal vandalism committed against 150 families, Veronica. You always lived by the fine print. You just missed the biggest one, the state penal code." As he spoke, the detective firmly but professionally took hold of Veronica's arms. She didn't struggle. She had finished her performance. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, She was still staring at Ethan, her mouth twisting into a final, incomprehensible snarl of defeat and resentment. "The tree," she whispered, her voice failing. "I wanted the tree gone." "You wanted everything gone," Ethan replied simply. The detective gently led Veronica away toward the squad car. As she passed the main entrance, a crowd of homeowners, alerted by the sirens and the sudden blackout, watched in stunned silence as the once omnipotent president of Maplewood Estates was escorted away in handcuffs, covered in grime and reeking of burnt copper. By noon, the immediate crisis had shifted from legal dissolution to emergency infrastructure repair. Arthur Vance, the receiver, proved to be an unexpected ally. His calm, process-driven efficiency was the perfect antidote to Veronica's chaos. "The sheriff's department has secured the offices and is holding Mrs. Thorne for criminal mischief and corporate fraud," Vance informed Ethan and Marcus, standing near the now taped-off junction box. "The priority now is restoring power and water. I have full control of the association funds, but the budget is decimated, and the insurance claim for this level of vandalism will take weeks." Ethan, swapping his tailored suit jacket for a utility vest he retrieved from his car, was already on the phone with his network of construction contacts. "I know a master electrician who owes me a favor. He can bypass the main meter and restore primary power to the security system and the management offices by tonight. But the irrigation pumps? They draw too much power for a temporary fix. They'll be down for days." Marcus looked grim. Days without water in this heat means every single lawn, every flower bed, every tree in this development dies. That's tens of millions in property damage, and the community will revolt. "They won't revolt if we coordinate," Ethan said, pulling out a drafting tablet. He wasn't the petty homeowner anymore. He was an architect, a systems thinker, applying his professional expertise to the community he had just liberated. "We have 150 families, 150 hoses, and an obsolete but still functional auxiliary water line built in the early 90s. We need to triage. Mr. Vance, I need immediate approval to spend $5,000 on temporary fire hoses and connection splitters. We will organize the community by sector to use the auxiliary line for a scheduled, essential watering program. Tonight, we save the trees first." Vance, watching Ethan organize the chaos with the same quiet authority he used to dismantle Veronica's power, didn't hesitate. "Consider it approved, Mr. Kyler. Now, about that redwood of yours?" Ethan looked toward his house. The chain-link fence still stood guarding the majestic tree. "The tree is fine. It missed one day of water. It can wait." That evening, the spirit of Maplewood Estates was utterly transformed. The residents who had been too afraid to speak at the meeting were now galvanized by the twin forces of outrage and necessity. The blackout was a shared trauma. Veronica's demise a shared victory. Ethan found himself not arguing for his lawn, but leading the charge to save everyone else's. He was out in the street, directing homeowners, handing out the newly purchased splitters, and explaining the triage system. The community, once divided and intimidated, was working together for the first time in years. Later that night, the auxiliary pump sputtering to life, Ethan sat on his porch, watching the water slowly saturate his own parched lawn. He was exhausted, covered in dust, but finally, profoundly at peace. Marcus pulled up in his car, holding a thick file. "A few updates, Ethan. The official findings are in. The 2021 election was definitively voided by the paper ballots. Veronica's presidency was illegitimate from the start. The petition for dissolution has moved forward, and the judge has ordered a full audit. Anyone unlawfully fined since 2018 is due a refund, plus interest. You are due back $9,450. Ethan nodded, watching the stream of water hit the base of the redwood. "Good. That covers the legal fees and the cost of the hose splitters." "And Veronica," Marcus continued, his voice hardening. "The sheriff released her on bail this afternoon, but she's facing serious charges. Corporate fraud, vandalism, and a civil suit from the HOA's insurance firm for the repair costs, which will be astronomical. She's financially ruined, and she has no one to blame but the fine print she overlooked." Marcus paused, then handed Ethan a single sheet of paper. "This is the final irony, Ethan, the legal coup de grace. While Vance was taking inventory of the management office, he found a note in the original 1995 incorporation documents. Remember the original reason she started finding you? The dove gray paint? Ethan frowned. Yes, non-approved color. My violation. Not exactly. Vance found an amendment to aesthetics bylaw filed in 2003, right after the original developer sold the final phase. It was never digitized, only kept in a supplementary binder. Marcus pointed to a single highlighted sentence on the page. Ethan read it, and a slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. Read it out loud, Marcus urged. Ethan cleared his throat and read the text aloud. Notwithstanding any provisions of this section, any external paint color matching the current Benjamin Moore color of the year at the time of application shall be deemed automatically approved, provided documentation of the color match is provided to the board within 30 days. Ethan looked at Marcus. The fine she issued me in June was for a color matching the current Benjamin Moore color of the year. Dove gray was the color for the region. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. You weren't in violation. You were pre-approved by a forgotten pre-existing bylaw. You could have shown her that document on day one and shut her down. But if I had, Ethan mused, looking past his fence to the stars now visible in the blackout sky, she would have just found another rule to weaponize. She would have never escalated to the lien, and I would never have had the necessary evidence of ultra-virus recklessness to file for dissolution. I would have won a battle, but lost the war. You let her win the small battles so you could take her entire kingdom, Marcus summarized, shaking his head in reluctant admiration. It was a beautiful legal trap, Ethan. 3 days later, the redwoods still stood, now happily receiving water from the restored auxiliary line. The fence was down, and the final fine notice, still crisp, lay on Ethan's desk. The sheriff's department had delivered a final notice to Veronica Thorne's massive Mediterranean villa. It was a formal order from the receiver, Arthur Vance. The document informed Veronica that due to the magnitude of the vandalism, the HOA's insurance claim, and the impending civil lawsuit, the receiver was forced to immediately seize and liquidate all non-essential common area assets to cover the debt and emergency repairs. The very first asset listed for immediate liquidation was the property purchased by the HOA using misappropriated funds shortly after Veronica's fraudulent election, a prime 1-acre plot of land adjacent to the community golf course. It was the very same piece of land that Veronica Thorne had been meticulously planning to develop for a year, the land where she had intended to build her grand custom-designed retirement home, financed by the inflated HOA reserves and shielded by her ill